Hi, my name is Annika Ortvald, and my research is about civil conflicts in Sub-Saharan Africa, and specifically spatial spillover effects on economic development. My research question is, how does civil conflict affect other neighbor countries? In my literature review, it mentions about the spatial spillover theory in relation to civil conflicts by Murdoch and Santos. Spillover effects refers to the impact that seemingly unrelated events in one nation can have on the economies of other nations. In Murdoch and Sandley's research, they focus on how civil conflicts can affect neighbor countries' economic development with the example of disruption to trade and investment. Furthermore, there is about civil conflicts in Sub-Saharan Africa, where research has shown a decrease of civil conflicts but an increase of the intensity of the violence in Sub-Saharan Africa. The nature of conflicts has changed from traditional civil war to now non-state-based conflicts. In their research by Siddharth et al., it was suggested that not only assistance to countries in conflict was ideal and needed to provide some relief, but also essential for countries suffering the spillover effects of conflicts. Then there was also about the entrance of refugees and how it can have a big impact on the communities they are being placed in, with examples of disease outbreaks, food and land scarcity, wage competition, and overburdened school and health care facilities. However, Bayes also mentioned that the arrival of refugees could raise the welfare of the host countries and stimulate the local economies through higher demand and influx of resources from international humanitarian assistance. Lastly, there was about the conflict trap, and which is about how conflict and economic performance creates a vicious cycle between the two, as conflicts don't slow down economic growth and development, and this in return will raise the likelihood of a conflict. If a country gets caught in this kind of vicious cycle, the country's condition might then start to deteriorate. From the literature review, I noticed how there was a missing gap on specifically spatial spillover effects by refugees, but at the same time there was also a connection between economic growth and civil conflicts. So therefore, I found it interesting to explore more on how refugees could possibly have an impact on economic growth. So for my theory, it is according to the spatial spillover theory, civil conflicts does not only affect the host countries, but the violence from the conflict will create spatial spillovers that will influence the neighboring countries that have geographical accessible borders. And from this, my hypothesis is that presence of a civil conflict in a neighboring country increases, the economic growth in the neighboring country will decrease. That moves on to my research design. So for my research design, I focused on Sub-Saharan Africa between 2000 to 2009. I specified it to these years as when I was retrieving the civil conflict data from Peace Research Institute Oslo, and the data retrieved there had to match the available data for my dependent and independent variables. I ended up with those 2 years, with that time gap. So for my independent variable, it is changing GDP per capita growth in annual percent, and was retrieved from the World Bank. Here are some of the list of countries that had experienced a civil conflict and not have available data for GDP, and therefore I had to remove the country from my data set. For my independent variable, it is entrance of refugees in neighbor countries, and was taken from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And here the first available data was from 2000, and therefore I started my data set from 2000 and ended it at 2009 because the latest civil conflict from the previous data set of civil conflict was in 2008. My sample size is 70, and it's spread out over 18 civil conflicts. The main limitations for this data set is missing data with examples of some countries not having available data for GDP per capita, or that there wasn't any data on received refugees and therefore had to be taken out to avoid outliers. So here you see the two graphs over my two variables. Moving moving on, here's my data set, which mainly just shows how I build up my data set to further get to my conclusion, my results. Yeah. So for my results, I found that the relationship between the two variables was not statistically significant, but still showed a positive relationship, as you can see on this graph right here, over on the right side. From this, I concluded that this does not give any conclusive answers because of no significant relationship, but it might be more research to be done with other variables such as government funding on refugees and how that one instead impacts economic development in a country. And I still want to highlight how there is like an importance for like assistance of aid still needed for refugees in neighbor countries, especially when you look at the literature review from Sidhart et al. And Bayes. And especially to like escape this kind of conflict trap. So, thank you.